Let's cross live to our correspondent Ben Bran, who's in Bucha. And Ben, we can see some of the destruction there behind you.
Yeah, this was the road where so many bodies were found in the street after the Russians finally left after their occupation. And so many homes have been destroyed. You can see home after home completely devastated here. And in fact, only yesterday the police told us about 3 more bodies of men that they had found here. Bodies with their hands tied behind their backs, showing signs of torture. So they will be added to the growing list of alleged war crimes in this town, in Bucha, and in other towns north of Kyiv. Now, the Ukrainian prosecutor general has said they are investigating 8,000 separate allegations of war crimes. And specifically in this town, in Bucha, the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian prosecutor general has now named and identified 10 soldiers from the Russian army. They're called the Despicable 10 in Ukraine, but 10 soldiers from the 64th Russian Motor Rifle Brigade who are alleged to have carried out atrocities in this town. Whether they'll ever be brought to justice remains to be seen. But the Ukrainians are saying that ultimately President Putin is their commander-in-chief, that he was responsible ultimately for the destruction that we see in towns like Bucha right now, and for the killings of so many civilians in places like this. In fact, just after the Russians had left here, President Putin honoured the very brigade that is alleged to have carried out war crimes here. He gave them a medal of honour, and saying that they had carried out their duties here with honour and heroism. So that is the scene here in Bucha. And in fact, as well as the Ukrainian war crimes investigators, there'll be investigators being sent by the Dutch government here very shortly on behalf of the International Criminal Court in The Hague, and they will be arriving here with some of the very latest forensic technology to investigate allegations of war crimes.
And Ben, obviously it's the sort of suffering of civilians that has been most difficult to watch, frankly. We know that there are reports of people trapped in Mariupol, some people being evacuated. What's the latest on that?
Well, it does look like some evacuations are underway. Certainly, that's what the Russians are saying. We have to wait for further concrete proof and evidence of that. Remember, there are about 2,000 Ukrainian fighters, we think, trapped in the depths of that Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol, alongside hundreds, perhaps 500 or 600 wounded fighters, some of them desperately ill from their wounds. Some of them apparently have gangrene and are really in a dire condition. But also alongside them, several hundred civilians, maybe 1,000 civilians, including members of their families, but other civilians too. And so the international community, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, when he was here in Ukraine and visiting President Putin in Russia, that's been one of his main aims, was to get some sort of evacuation operation underway in Mariupol, humanitarian corridors under the auspices of the United Nations and the Red Cross. So it does look like finally, after so much suffering there, we are seeing the start of that evacuation, but only a few people so far, perhaps around 50 according to the Russians, have been evacuated. There are many more in a desperate condition who need to be got out of that steelworks in Mariupol.
And we know, Ben, that much of the focus from the Russian viewpoint is on the east, on the Donbass region. What's the latest information from there?
Well, the Ukrainians say that they are pushing back in certain areas, especially around Kyiv, and they've had some success. But from all the accounts I have been seeing, the Russians are using pretty overwhelming firepower. Remember, they pulled out of areas like this, areas like Bucha, from near Kyiv, in order to refocus their campaign specifically on that eastern front in the Donbass region, and that is where they are now concentrating their firepower. And the Ukrainians are saying and admitting that they are taking heavy casualties there because the Russians are using a long-range artillery. They have longer-range artillery than the Ukrainians. They're also bombing from the air, and there's not a lot of those Ukrainian troops can do about it. They're in bunkers, they're in trenches. It's pretty hard for them to fight back, and they are taking heavy casualties, although they say they are pushing back in some areas and are inflicting casualties on the Russian side as well. But it is looking like that war in the east is going to be a long war that could last weeks, months, maybe even years, and developing into a kind of war of attrition, really. President Putin's initial idea of a lightning strike to take this country has disappeared, of course, and we're settling in now for a longer war. In fact, NATO have been talking in the last few days about the West needing to see themselves and Ukraine as in this for the long haul.
OK, Ben Brown there for us in Bucha. Thanks to you and the team there. Thank you.